My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Can an interest in UFO folklore and reports of alien encounters inspire a novel? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Dona Masi, is an engaging and experienced speaker with a wealth of alien contact and visitation research, examples, theories, and her own experiences. Dona Masi is a writer and editor whose short fiction and articles are used in reading and writing assignments throughout the United States. Her articles about the arts, the environment, and current affairs have appeared in Foster's Daily Democrat, the Seacoast newspapers, and Portsmouth Press. She's also a playwright, and 2 of her plays were performed at the Provincetown Theater Company. Her website is donamasi.com, and she joins me this week to share her new novel about alien abduction, The Taking. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Dona Masi. Welcome, Dona.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Dona, please share with our listeners your path and how it led to your career as a writer and an editor.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been, a writer pretty much all of my life. Writing stories when I was a kid and pursued it as a hobby and also a vocation. I am a writer and editor. My main job is as an English language arts assessment developer for K through 12. So I write a lot of tests and passages and perform all of the related tasks with that. I've written fiction, I've written plays. So that's sort of my path as a writer. It's been ongoing throughout my life. And my book, The Taking, a novel about UFOs and alien abductions, comes out of my lifelong interest in UFO stories and reports of alien abductions. And it just seemed like a natural, well, by the time I started writing it, it seemed like the timing was right, and it was just a natural thing for me to do, because I've always learned about the phenomenon, the UFO and alien abduction phenomenon. Always watched documentaries, read books about it. It's just something I've explored as an avid enthusiast. And I even, while I was in grad school taking an anthropology class, I wrote an ethnography about UFO folklore, and which was really interesting. I learned a lot. I thought it was an opportunity to do a real deep dive into the topic. And it took a little convincing of my professor to let me go ahead with the topic. But, we had a few conversations about it. And he said, okay, go ahead, run with it and see what you can make of it. And so that gave me the opportunity to do even more research into it. And some of the reading that I did really did inspire me to write the story for The Taking. I thought that, what I'd learned on my own and also in my research for my course just made me think that it would be a really dramatic and emotional story to tell about a person who is an alien abductee, and some of the emotional and psychological impact it would have on that character, because I I know that there are a lot of nonfiction books about this, but to my knowledge, there aren't that many that deal with fiction, that are fiction, unless they're hard science fiction or intergalactic stories and such. So I wanted to look at the impact on human beings and explore that in fiction.
So the question I have to ask Have you personally had either UAP sightings or contact experiences?
You know, the best answer I can give to that is that I'm not totally sure whether I do have a memory of something um, that I could have maybe experienced, but I cannot be sure because it was only a one time, at least as best as I can remember. And it was a long time ago when I was a small child. I was only about 7 years old. I think I was in the second grade. And it, if you want me to go into a little detail about it, I'll try to do it briefly. But um, it was at recess, and I have a recollection of sitting on a swing or a bench, and I looked up in the sky, and there was a cylinder shaped object above me. It didn't seem like it was all that far above me. I don't know, it's hard to judge feet, maybe 100, 200 feet in the air, but pretty close. It was sparkling in the sun. It looked like a shiny metal object. The tips, the left and right tips of it were stuck in two clouds. So I couldn't see the ends of it, but it was quite large. It looked like it had windows. And when I saw it, I said to myself, that looks like a plane, but it doesn't have any wings. And then the next thing I recall is that for some reason I looked away from it, or there seemed to be kind of actually, really, it was like a blip in time. And then after that occurred, I looked back up and it was still there, but I had this really strong fear. I was very scared and, I petrified actually. And I took off running and I ran back to school. And what was odd was that there was nobody else in the playground at this point right before I took off and started running back to school. I was all alone. And I was thinking to myself that my teacher was going to be angry because I wasn't in class. I was late for class. I was concerned about that. And I went in the classroom door and the class had already resumed. The teacher was in front of the class. The odd part was that the teacher didn't even seem to pay any attention to me coming in late or notice or react at all. And neither did any of the other kids, it struck me at the time that seemed pretty crazy that she wouldn't have reacted in some way or said something. And I went to my desk and I sat down in the chair. It seemed to me that at that moment when I sat down, I lost conscious memory of the experience. Another thing that was odd about it is that it was a day when my best friend at the time and I were inseparable, and we were always together. She was my across the street neighbor, and we would have been together on any other normal day at recess, but I was all alone that day, as a matter of fact. And so that is the experience that I had. I don't know whether it was real or not. I don't know whether it was a dream or something I imagined. At this point, I guess, unless I went under hypnosis or something to that effect, there's really no way to know. But it has stuck with me. And for a long, long time, I'd remember it, and then I'd forget about it, and I'd remember it, and I'd forget about it. But the odd part about that is that every time I did remember it, it was almost like I had never thought of it before. Until when I got to be an adult at some point in time, I remembered it, and it never left my conscious memory. So that was my experience. Now, ever since then, I look up at the sky. I often look, and would think I'd like to see one. And but as far as I know, that was my only experience. But I think that it did probably generate some of my interest in the topic.
And what you described is so profound that you actually used that theme as one of the themes in your book, an event that took place in your book, which is fascinating to me, that this was so moving to you that you actually incorporated that into your book. Where did you get some of the other story ideas in the taking about UFOs and alien abductions?
Well, they definitely came from what I've learned about what experiencers go through. You know, the emotional stress that it can cause does cause. I'm not saying that whoever it is that is taking people away necessarily wants to harm them. I don't know. I mean, but I know that since this is such a foreign experience to all of us, I mean, we're all earthlings bound to earth. As far as we know, there's nothing out there, or we believe that there is, but um, most of humanity isn't really thinking about that. We're so focused on our life and our reality here on earth. But I was fascinated by what kind of impact that would have on an experiencer, particularly before they knew what was going on. Were there any subconscious effects of their experiences that played a key role in their outlook, their perception of the world, themselves? And then once they do discover what's happening, living with it, the uncertainty of not knowing when and if it's going to happen to you again, having like I'm sure you understand this, people that won't believe you, can't believe you, or maybe they do, but they're too frightened to let you talk about it. And I just thought, well, what an isolating experience that must be. And some of those particular themes in the book were definitely inspired by some of the literature I read that was written by Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who treated, oh boy, I think he treated about 90 patients for trauma from paranormal experiences. I say paranormal because when they began their work with him, they didn't know what was going on with them. They described them as being paranormal experiences. They didn't know that they were UFO abductions. That came out very gradually after a long time of Dr. Mack and these patients working together. And he started out as an open-minded skeptic, interested in Eastern philosophy and such. But by the time, he had worked with dozens of patients, he really did come to believe that they were having encounters with extraterrestrial aliens. And one of the things that he tried to do in his therapy was to help them find some coping mechanisms with it and to try to find for themselves a sense of purpose for why this was happening to them, why they seemed to be singled out for it. I mean, he had to treat the trauma because it was so difficult for them to get through their days and they were full of fear. And so, just like we do with any experience, try to make the best of it that we can and get what we can out of it that is positive. So I think that was really the core of his work. And he made me think about what kind of effect this would have on a person to be going through these experiences.
Did you interview anyone else, any other experiencers?
Yes, I did. Especially when I wrote the ethnography from the anthropology class, I did interview experiencers. Some of them were people that I knew. And then when I started talking about what I was writing about, they came forward and told me about their experiences. Some of them were just people I met that I was introduced to because I was writing this paper. They I was certainly fascinated by the stories they had to tell. One person was, as far as I know, he hadn't had any close encounters of the third kind, but he had seen some very strange things repeatedly throughout his life. Big red discs in the sky, um, UFOs that just seem UAPs that when he was driving home would just be above the trees and right there. And he would, every time he had an experience like this, he got the distinct feeling that they were aware of him and that they were there for him, or at least for him to observe them. And he was also driving home one night with his son, and they both saw something strange. As they were getting close to their house, there's a big open field across the street, and they both saw a big red object in the sky. And he saw several different kinds of objects, the classic, saucer shape, cigar shape, big red balls, bright, angry looking balls in the sky. And his reaction was he didn't like it. He didn't want it to ever happen again. He wished it never had happened, and it freaked him out. And he didn't want me to tell anybody about it. And of course I didn't. I wrote about it anonymously. And then I did meet a couple of people who said that they were abductees. One I talked with, I think it was the day after he felt that he had had an abduction experience. And I didn't know him very well. I didn't really know him at all. It was hard for me to gauge whether he was telling the truth about it or not. I tended to believe him because I do believe that this is really happening. But still, he was very agitated and frightened by what was happening to him. And this, according to him, had happened multiple times. So yes to both questions. And researchers. I've spoken to UFO researchers at length and heard about some of the reports that they've investigated and some of their own encounters too.
You have been a playwright in addition to writing your books. I'm wondering if you were considering writing a screenplay based on The Taking, because it's a really compelling story.
I hadn't thought about writing a screenplay, although, I think it would make a good movie for sure, a good film. I guess if I had my heart's desire, if there was a producer who was interested in it, I can see myself in the capacity as a script consultant or something. I've never written a film script, so that would be a new experience for me. And I could try, and I could study how to do it. But no, I haven't considered it until you actually mentioned it. Good idea, I guess.
I strongly encourage you to pursue that once the book is published. You have a marketplace out there with people who are hungry for this type of film, because I think it would be excellent as a movie. Now, please briefly describe the story of The Taking and what readers can look forward to when they read it.
Sure. Well, it's a suspenseful book. It's kind of a thriller about something that is on the supernatural side. And I think it explores a great mystery that we have had since, the dawn of humanity. There's also it's also a story about friendship and family loyalty, dealing with difficult truths, kind of a coming of age story. I deliberately wanted it to be a mixed genre of literary fiction, realistic fiction, and paranormal. I like combining genres sometimes. And So I wanted it to have a realistic component to it. I also thought by making the characters relatable, ordinary people, telling about their lives and their community and their friendships and things that it would make it to more of an emotional story. There would be much more at stake for these people if you got to, for the reader, would be more invested in the characters. If you really got to know them and to care about them. And, in the book, I deal with, well, the character, how do the people that are close to the main character respond to this? What this person is going through. And there's two characters in the book that are alien abductees. And one of them is younger, and one of them is an adult. Their experiences with the kind of support that they get are very different. One is very isolated and nobody will believe him. The other has more support from the family eventually once they accept what's going on. And so I wanted to make the point that these people are going through a really traumatic experience that is so disruptive of their lives. And how do they even begin to cope with the uncertainty that this brings, and the help and aid and support of people who care about you, and the fact and having them believe you really is a determining factor on about how you might be able to cope with it and come to terms with it, and somehow still be able to live a life where you can have happiness and some contentment and make plans for your life and all of that sort of stuff. I do have the book right here in front of me. If that's not enough information, I could read the back cover copy. It gives you a little bit more of an idea of the actual plot, if you wanted me to do that.
Actually, why don't we do that in the next segment? My guest is Dona Masi, her breathtaking novel, The Taking. Dona, please share with our listeners where they can get your novel and find out more about you and your work.
Sure. The book is available, The Taking is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and pretty much anywhere where books are sold. As I said, it's in pre-order right now. The publishing date is January 2025 in North America. In the UK and other countries, it's December 2024. And I do have a website. It's donamasi.com, DONAMASI.com.
And we'll be back with more of Dona and The Taking after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dona Masi. We're talking about her new book, The Taking. Dona, in the last segment, you said you were going to tell us a little bit more about the story in The Taking. Please go ahead.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'll just read the brief back cover copy of the book. An unnatural silence and a feeling that you are all alone in the world. John and his daughter Vera grieve the loss of Vera's mother, who mysteriously disappeared when Vera was a baby. As John struggles to raise his troubled daughter, he dismisses connections between his wife's disappearance and Vera's bizarre dreams of otherworldly creatures. But when he finds Vera unconscious, lying in a ring of scorched trees, he begins to believe the mysterious outside force is controlling her fate and his. The Taking is a suspenseful story depicting a loving but difficult relationship between a father and daughter amid the strange events that underlie their life in a small New England town.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
I've had the privilege of interviewing Kathleen Marden about her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill's
Oh,
experience.
yes.
What makes the Hills abduction story so believable for you?
Well, they say that it's one of the most well documented cases of a UFO alien abduction. There is so much evidence, and it's what also makes it compelling, I think, is because I live in New Hampshire. I'm 10 miles from the town where Betty and Barney Hill lived, and it's well known in New Hampshire, as well as being, it's also a very, very famous story in ufology. But in New Hampshire, it's, I guess, probably particularly well known. I had the opportunity to speak at length with Kathleen Marden when I was writing the ethnography for my grad class. And, she shared, I knew a lot about the case, but I learned a lot from her that I didn't know. And she was in the midst or just finishing writing a book about it. I think it's called The Betty and Barney Hill UFO and Encounter Captured. And I just was so fascinated by everything that she had to say about it. Another thing that captivates me is that right here in the town next to me at the University of New Hampshire in Durham, in the special collections, they have artifacts from the Betty and Barney Hill case, including the dress that Betty was wearing on the night of the event, which was all when they got home that night after their interrupted journey. She took the dress off, put it in the closet, and it sat there for 40 years, and it's covered with some kind of strange powder. It's all torn up. She had no idea how that happened. Just a lot of strange things. The story about the star map, where when Betty was on board the spaceship and she was having a conversation with one of the leaders, and that entity showed her a map because she had asked them where they were located, where their planet was. And he was trying to tell her. She had no frame of reference as like how far away it was from the Earth, etc. But he showed her a star map. And she drew that map from memory under hypnosis. And then I believe that I'm no astronomer, but it contained certain stars that weren't even discovered until years and years and years later after her experience. So there's the dress, there's the recordings that when they were under hypnosis, when they went to a psychiatrist in Boston, that where they're talking about their experiences, and it's absolutely bone chilling to listen to them. And I have, and Kathleen's book, she has transcriptions of those recordings that Betty and Barney did when they were under hypnosis, when they saw a psychiatrist in Boston, because they were having all sorts of anxiety and traumatic dreams and etc. They're the spots that were on the back of their car when they returned home that morning from their trip, which was in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and that's where the abduction took place. They couldn't explain that, and they later found out that they were radioactive spots from an Air Force officer who came out from the Pease Air Force Base, which used to be nearby, because they called Pease Air Force Base to report that they had seen something in the sky, something strange. He came out to investigate. He found that. There's just a loads of evidence. So that's why they say it's one of the most well documented cases. And as far as I understand, there are other experiences in Betty's family too. I think Kathleen Martin herself is an experiencer. So some very odd things, have happened, and it just captured my imagination. I mean, my imagination is captured by a lot of stories, but I think the Betty and Barney Hill story is definitely one of my favorites. And I've seen Betty. I never talked to her before, but I've spotted her. She's long passed, but I've seen her around. So just knowing that she's in the area, knowing of her, knowing it's a story, I think that's what makes me most fascinated about it.
Is there another interesting UFO or alien encounter that you'd like to talk about?
Well, there's another famous story from New Hampshire called the the incident at Exeter, and this took place in 1965. It's actually remembered every year around here at the Exeter UFO Festival, which is pretty fun place to go on a Saturday. I don't know, it's every Labor Day weekend. I think it's been going on, about 10 or 15 years now. And that wasn't an alien abduction story, but there were a lot of people that saw UAPs over the course of 2 nights. And the first sighting, I think, was from a young guy who was hitchhiking home. He had been visiting his girlfriend, and he was hitchhiking back to the town where he lived. It was very late. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And this UFO was right in front of all of a sudden, in front of him on the road. And it was just hovering there. And then it took off, and it was there for several minutes. That he was absolutely freaked out by it. So much so that the next car that came by, he just kind of like stepped out in front of the car, waving his arms, screaming and yelling. He wanted to get out of there as fast as he could. So the person who picked him up dropped him off at the police station so he could report it. And while he was there talking to the police officer, more calls kept coming in from people who said that they'd seen something strange. They'd seen a flying saucer. Well, the police officer went with him to the spot where this young man had the sighting, and he saw it too. So there were 2 witnesses there at that time: the police officer and this young guy. And so the police officer that was present with him got on his radio and asked another officer to come out because it was still there. I mean, it was there for minutes, a long time. And that officer came, and he saw it too. It was still there. So that was 3 witnesses to it. And later that night, as I said, there were other reports. One police officer saw a car on the side of the road, and it was quite late. He pulled up in front of it thinking that, maybe they needed help. And he got out of the car, and a woman was in there, and she was absolutely hysterical because she had said that she saw this big flying saucer and had been following her, and it was right over her car. And then when it went away, she just kind of like fell apart and was terrified. And so that was another pretty well documented. I mean, it was witnessed by, 2 police officers who probably wouldn't be making that up if they hadn't seen it. And then the original witness, and then other witnesses too. So that's a very famous case. And it took place in Exeter, New Hampshire. And so therefore they, just like out in Roswell, where they have the Roswell UFO Festival, we have an Exeter UFO Festival every year.
We just had another series of hearings on the UAP phenomenon on Capitol Hill. Do you believe that governments, especially the U.S. government, are hiding information about the existence of extraterrestrial aliens and human-alien encounters from the public?
I think it's quite possible. Um, when you listen to people who've worked for the government in the military, for instance, and then they're coming forward with their stories of things that they've witnessed or that they know of others, people have witnessed, um, and all of the absolute dismissal and denial that's gone on for decades. And no, until recently, the government wouldn't even say that there was something to be investigated. So I think it's highly possible. It's very convincing when you listen to people, pilots, Navy pilots, Air Force pilots, people on ships out at sea. It's you got to wonder. Not everybody is making this up. I mean, certainly some people are not going to be telling the truth, but I think that probably most of them are. And all of the intimidation that they have experienced, threats to their, even their very lives, their careers, their families. They just somebody wanted them to be quiet about it. The other fascinating story where there seemed to be a lot of cover up is the
Rendlesham Forest.
Rendlesham Forest, yes, where they had UFO sightings over the course of a couple of nights, and some airmen went out to investigate, and they saw these very crazy bright lights. Some of them say that they were close up with a grounded UFO. Whether it was a crash or not, I'm not sure. But even their commanding officer, who didn't believe him at first, went out with them the second night. He experienced this all himself too. And some of those witnesses were harassed and intimidated. One person, and I heard this out of his own mouth, was his entire history of ever having been in the Air Force just disappeared. Nobody, he was searching for his records. They weren't there. They denied that he was ever in the service, and he was in for 2 or 3 years. So seems to be a complete lie, that they made up because they didn't want any more questions asked. So I would say that if the government is going to those lengths to cover it up and to make people just shut up about it, I would say, yeah, probably so.
In 1977, I was in the Air Force. I was stationed at Homestead Air Force Base in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working for the Base Information Office. And we would take turns on weekends answering phone calls coming in for people questioning things about the base and so on. And it was my turn. And that Friday night, my commander called me and said he's taking over all the calls, that I don't have to answer the phone that weekend and that I can take the weekend off, and that he'd explain to me the following Monday, and that I could make it up on another weekend. And I was grateful to have that time off. In any event, that Monday morning, he called me into his office and he said, we had a situation where a Cuban MiG landed on the base unexpectedly under the radar. And that's the reason why he was taking the calls. And I believed what he said to me, and never thought of it. And he said, don't discuss it. I never thought anything further of it. The following weekend, I had taken over the duty again. And that Friday night, I received a phone call from someone saying about, what does the Air Force have to say about the UFO that landed at Homestead Air Force Base? I said, I don't know what you're talking about, sir. He says, well, a UFO landed at Homestead Air Force Base. And I said, sir, the Air Force stopped studying the UFO phenomenon when they closed Project Blue Book, determining that it was not a threat to national security. I'm not exactly sure what you heard or what you saw, but that's all I have to share with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that what I found out was that story about the Cuban MiG had taken place, but not that year. It had taken place 2 years before. And I guarantee you another Cuban MiG could not have gotten down. So what actually landed at Homestead Air Force Base that weekend
Wow.
that man was calling me about? And then later, long after I was out of the Air Force, I read the story about Richard Nixon taking Jackie Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base and taking him to a hangar where he showed him alien craft and alien bodies. So,
Yeah.
I had a close brush with that, not enough to see it myself with my own eyes, but I thought that was a fascinating story, the way the government sort of pushed that to the side. My guest is Dona Masi. Her book is called The Taking. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Let's take a moment to breathe. Deep inhale. Extend your spine. Remain focused on what you're doing. If safe to do so, exhale slowly, leaning to one side. Inhale back to center. If safe to do so, exhale slowly to the opposite side. Find mental health resources at loveyourmindtoday.org. This message is brought to you by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ed Council.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dona Masi. We're talking about her incredible book, The Taking. What do you think the intentions of extraterrestrials are for visiting our planet and for humankind?
I can only speculate. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that's one of those ambiguous things. In my book, I don't do a lot of trying to answer that question because I feel like I don't know enough. I mean, I know what some people say, that, you know, they're here to heal and help us and to help us to maybe save us from ourselves. But there's also you hear about people being, you know, physically harmed, certainly scared to death by it. Maybe that's because they don't understand what's going on. That's where the fear comes. It's hard for me to say. It really is. I think that if I were going through an abduction experience, you know, I can, even though I believe that it's true, I would certainly wonder, well, what do you want with me? What are you going to do to me? So I have to be honest in answering that question, that I don't feel like I can say for sure. I mean, I think it's quite possible that we could be being visited by races that mean to help us and are benevolent, but we also could be simultaneously being visited by those who don't have our best interests at heart. And maybe, there's something to be frightened and wary about that. So it's hard for me to say.
In your opinion, are we close to official disclosure of ET visitation and contact?
Well, you hear people say that we're getting closer and closer to that, and that the release of information by the government, not only the U.S. government, but other governments too, and a little bit more openness that has occurred. Of course, it seems like every time they get a little bit open, then they slam the door shut again. But we've had more acknowledgement of that there's some kind of mystery going on, or by the government than we ever had before. So it could very well be that we are getting closer, that we are closer than we realize. And maybe we're closer than we realize to actually having the truth revealed to us by being visited, so that it makes it obvious to everybody that there are beings coming from outside, from other planets, other dimensions, what have you, and that they might have been here a while. So that's hard to say too.
How do you think humanity will respond once there is official disclosure?
I would like to think that would help bring us together. I remember reading about Ronald Reagan, who was a believer, and he had several sightings. And he even spoke about it when he was president, that he often wondered what would happen if we did suddenly find out that, aliens are real and they're coming here, and how would we react? And he said, he hoped that it would bring us together, humanity. I mean, I think that he maybe was perceiving it as a danger to us when he made the statement that we would come together to defend ourselves or unite. I'm not really sure what was behind it entirely, but it sounded that way. So I can only hope that we'd handle it like with maturity, with reasonableness, and maybe with openness, if that would be best for us. But I tend to think that it would probably cause a big general panic too, regardless of whether they started blasting us like War of the Worlds when they got here or not. Just the mere idea that, something had landed, there would be panic, there would be fear. There would be those that would welcome it and receive it, with open arms and want to get to know them. But, there would be a great deal of fear, and it could lead to violence against each other, or it could lead, certainly, or fighting back, defending ourselves, even if there really wasn't a reason why we had to. I mean, we have a light side and we have a dark side, and we don't usually react to something in tandem with the same reaction, So it's hard to say. But except for the fact that I do think that there'd both be an openness to it and a welcoming, and also sheer panic and fear.
In your book, The Taking, you share the story of a young girl who becomes an abductee. What advice would you offer to parents whose children report to them anomalies?
Well, I think that they should listen to them and be open-minded about it, and not just dismiss it as some childhood fantasy. I mean, I think to know whether it is or not, you have to listen to what they're telling you, and maybe learn more about experiences that other people have said that they've had, and compare the details of the story. But I would try to find out in greater depth from my child about what happened to them. For one thing, they may be afraid and need that kind of comfort, and whether it's true or not, they're going to need some sort of reassurance. So I think to dismiss it is insulting and just definitely not a good idea. People, when they're afraid, if that's what the reaction is, they need comfort and reassurance. I also say that maybe if they do come to think that there's something going on, that, maybe they find the right kind of counseling for them, not to somebody who is open-minded, not who's just trying to find some kind of psychological disorder to explain it all away, or a support group.
Absolutely. Do you think that readers will come away from The Taking believing that UFOs and alien abductions are real?
Well, that's hard for me to be sure about either. I think that reading the book could give them pause to stop and consider the possibility at any rate. I think it could, I hope that it will do that. I don't know if it's going to convince anybody. It might come through, depend on the perspective that they have and their opinions that they bring to it to begin with. Whether it persuades them absolutely that this is going on or not. I think that, this is fiction. So, maybe there are better vehicles that would be more persuasive to people if they actually got were listening to eyewitness accounts or experiencers' accounts. That might be more convincing to them. But just so folks know, the details that I have in my book are not ones that I make up. They're like the characteristics of a lot of experiencers report. So then I'm just taking what I've learned in my study and also recreational enjoyment of the topic, and using them in my book to try to make it realistic, so the experience as realistic for the readers as possible, and as persuasive to the readers as far as accepting their willfully suspending their disbelief so that they can become wrapped up in the story.
I will share that anyone who reads this book will immediately develop a tremendous amount of compassion for the characters.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Absolutely. Do you think that people will be scared reading The Taking? Some people.
I think so. Sure. There are some really kind of dark moments, suspenseful moments, especially if you like, if you're engaged with the characters and you feel for them. Then of course that's true of any book. The more you are invested in the characters, the more worried you are about them when they're in danger, or if something's going terribly wrong for them. You want everything to turn out all right. And so, yeah, I do think so. I also know from my own experience about reading some nonfiction books about UFOs and alien abductions, they certainly scared me. There were a few that I read that I couldn't read at night. Mm-hmm. It would kept me up awake all night long, or I'd go to sleep and I'd dream about it and I'd wake up and, it was like I had a real experience. It was so vivid, my dream. So yes, I definitely was terrified by them. And I think that others could be too. But then again, the book also has a lot of warmth in it. It has some humor. It has, it's not all just you hit the ground running and it's all terror and horror. It's not, but it's definitely suspenseful. It's kind of a slow burn, the tension. So, Yeah, I mean, I want them to be a little scared. Sure, I do.
Absolutely. My guest is Dona Masi. Her book, The Taking. Donna, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you.
Sure. The name of the novel is The Taking. It's published by Roundfire Books. They're an imprint of Collective Inc. It's in pre-order right now, and so it's available to pre-order on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and anywhere books are sold. The release date is January 2025 in the U.S. and actually all of North America. So that's when it's going to be published. In North America, in the UK, in other countries, it's December 2024. If you pre-order it now, you should receive it in the early January, the 1st or 2nd of January, as soon as it's released. And then hopefully it will end up in bookstores too.
And your website.
And my website is Dona Masi, DONAMASI.com.
Donna, thank you so much for joining us. And as I shared with you in the beginning, I think this is going to make not only is it a wonderful novel, but it'll make an excellent motion picture.
Thank you, Victor. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Herman. Have a wonderful week.